And here we are. This is the Krakowskie Przedmieście, which is the historic city street in Warsaw leading to the old town. Behind me is Nicholas Copernicus, the famous Polish astronomer. Behind him is the headquarters of the Polish Academy of Sciences, where I got my doctorate in history last year. That's the main headquarters, and the History Institute is in the Old Town, where we are headed now. Why don't we take a look at what's in front of me, one of my favorite sites in Warsaw. That's the Church of the Holy Cross, Kościół Świętego Krzyża, where Frederic Chopin's heart is buried or entombed in one of the columns there. So back in the 19th century, that was the tradition to, instead of burying the body whole, they remove the heart. This was also the case with Jan III Sobieski, the Polish king victor at the Battle of Vienna. His heart is also in Warsaw, but his body is at the Wawel Cathedral, buried in the crypt there in Krakow. And we have an exceptionally lot of noise here, so we're going to see how this audio turns out. Lots of police because the presidential palace is right here. And here we have the University of Warsaw, which is the main university in the capital. Of course, there are many universities, but this is the best known and I think the highest ranked. So here you have the university bus stop. And then in a moment, you'll see the gates of the university. So going back to Chopin for a moment, his body is buried at Père Lachaise. It's probably pronounced differently, but Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, where he died. So I've visited his grave before, but his heart is here in Warsaw because he wasn't born in Warsaw. He was born in Żelazowa Wola, but he lived in Warsaw. He lived, I believe, over there across the street. And then he also lived here and those are the gates to the University of Warsaw. Let's see what it says here about Chopin. So, Frederic Chopin lived and studied in the walls of the University of Warsaw between 1817 and 1827. Oh, actually, that's what it says. I was translating it live, so yeah, so he left Warsaw when he was 18 and never came back. There in the distance is the main university building, used to be the university library. Now the university library is behind the university and downhill from there. So people are walking around, some coming back from classes. This is one of my favorite things to do, is to hop up on this thing and then hop down. I've come this way many times, many times, hundreds and hundreds of times. Everybody's looking around. They want to see the fancy camera that I'm using. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. I just ordered it on Sunday and it arrived on Tuesday. Today's Thursday. It's the first time I'm using it. I unpacked it. I have the Action 3 from DJI as well, but this has much better low light capabilities, and that's why I'm using it. It has better autofocus. It has autofocus. The Action camera is just a single focus from what I understand. So now we're moving along Krakowskie Przedmieście towards the Old Town. And in a moment, I will show you the Hotel Bristol and the Hotel Europejski, the European hotel, the two best-known hotels in Warsaw and two of the most expensive. Maybe the Polonia Palace near where I live is more expensive than one or the other, but I think probably the Europejski has the highest average prices. So there on the right you have the Bristol, founded, as I understand, by Ignacy Jan Paderewski, the famous Polish pianist, one of the, I believe he was the second Polish prime minister after Poland regained independence. He was a friend of Herbert Hoover's, which helped secure American relief for Poland back in 1919 through 1922. Huge operation, millions of people fed, especially children and nursing mothers, by the American Relief Administration, led by Herbert Hoover. And Paderewski was also friends with Colonel Edward House, who was President Woodrow Wilson's closest advisor. He wasn't actually a colonel. It was an honorific title. But he had a big influence on Wilson, and perhaps without that relationship, there wouldn't have been Poland as the 13th of Wilson's 14 points announced during World War I about how Poland should be free and should have access to the sea. So you have similarities in the architecture. You have the European hotel, Hotel Europejski, very nicely renovated and totally renovated about 5-6 years ago. And then the Bristol, very nice for many years. Survived the Warsaw Uprising. Most buildings in this area especially were destroyed, so it's nice that it survived. And I think we have some kind of a political protest here. Poland recently had its elections, and I'm going to say a few things before I get close because it's going to get loud there. Maybe too loud because of the wind anyway, but Poland had parliamentary elections 3.5 weeks ago. And although the ruling Law and Justice Party got the most votes, the opposition, consisting of 3 parties mainly, got a total of more votes. So they are likely to be able to create a majority government that is going to be in stark opposition to the last 8 years of this law and justice government. And according to the Constitution, the party that gets the most votes has the right to attempt to form a new government, which is what the president of Poland entrusted to the current prime minister, Mateusz Morawiecki. The chances of him forming a government are low because the opposition is strongly opposed to the current government, but it's constitutional and they have, I believe, a month to do it. But the opposition would like to gain power immediately, and I believe that's what this protest is about, is they're angry that they didn't just hand over power even though they have no obligation to do so. So we'll see what they're saying and doing, but it looks like they're acting quite silly and using vulgarities, which is a standard on the left, the political left in Poland. Both sides use various methods, but the left is especially nasty in Poland. That's just my opinion, but it's true. And there you have the presidential palace with Prince Józef Poniatowski, who died, I believe it was during the Russian campaign, Napoleon's Russian campaign. So you have lots of... So it's a very small protest, maybe 20 people, but signs and colors and everything, so... I regret that these lions aren't here. These lions are also survived the uprising. They're being renovated. I hope they're not totally renovated, because you can see the signs of the bullets that hit them during the uprising. So 2 lions on each side. So I believe there's a total of 4 in front of the presidential palace. So this is where the president of Poland lives. And here we are again. Hopefully past the worst of the noise, though now bells are ringing. One of Warsaw's nice churches here. You can see the flags up on the lamp posts. Those are in preparation for November 11th, which is Polish Independence Day. In 1918, that's the day. It wasn't one day, but that's the one that was chosen as the Independence Day. It was a process that lasted weeks, but that was the day, I believe, that the German soldiers were disarmed in Warsaw. So there are various things going on with Independence Day. It's not like the 4th of July. 4th of July, of course, is in the summer, so it's a much nicer time of year for barbecues and whatnot. November 11th, it has been the first snow in the past. It's usually getting cold. The forecast is calling for rain. But nonetheless, it's a time to reflect and to celebrate the fact that Poland is a free country. Of course, Poland lost its independence for 50 years in the 20th century because of Germany and Soviet Russia. And the holiday wasn't celebrated during the war, World War II, and the communist time in Poland. There is the Independence March, which I will be attending, which is the biggest grassroots event of its kind in Poland. Up to several 100,000 people will be there. It crosses the Poniatowski Bridge in central Warsaw, which my grandfather helped to defend in World War II, where he almost died from German aerial bombardment. But luckily the bomb that was going to kill him didn't blow up. So I'll tell that story another day. And so here we have Herbert Hoover Square, which is one of my favorite places and also one of the most underutilized places in Warsaw. So I'll give you a pan view of the square. It's very big and it's in a very prominent place. So that stone I'm going to show you in a moment. And then here you have Herbert Hoover Square, named in honor of Herbert Hoover for all of that humanitarian relief that I mentioned earlier. And there once stood right here the Monument of Gratitude to America, which is no longer here, but hopefully it'll be rebuilt. I'm part of the social committee to rebuild the Monument of Gratitude to America. And my dad, the curator emeritus of the European collection at the Hoover Institution Library and Archives at Stanford, helped to install this stone back in the early 90s, 1992. And it's hard to read, but it says Hoover Square, the name given as a sign of gratitude for help of the United States for Poland, organized by Herbert Hoover. And then at the bottom you have 1992, that's the date the stone was placed. And the stone is a part of the castle, the royal castle, which I will show you in just a moment, or a few minutes. So hopefully the Monument of Gratitude to America can return. It was definitely well deserved for what America did for Poland, not only because of the relief for children. There were thousands and thousands of kitchens throughout Poland that served food to needy children, like I said, back in the first years of Poland's independence after World War I. Also, Poland secured, oh my gosh, looks like something is burning. Poland also secured access to the sea, which was critical. This was back in February of 1919. The Americans, who were part of the American Relief Administration mission to Poland, helped secure access through Gdańsk, which was then still Danzig, German-controlled Danzig. And it was super important because Poland was basically cut off from everyone economically. It was at war or in conflict with all of its neighbors. It had just regained independence, and just a year and a half later would be the high point of the war between Poland and Soviet Russia. So because of the ability to gain access to the sea in early 1919, not just humanitarian aid, but all kinds of economic aid flowed into Poland, revived the country, provided food, clothing, raw materials for industry, all kinds of things, medical supplies, military supplies, not just from the US, but from all over the world. And this created a buffer, which I believe, which I argued in my PhD dissertation, which I hope to release as a book sometime in the not too distant future, served as a buffer to save Poland in those critical times when it faced being overrun by the Red Army. Back in the summer of 1920, in August of 1920, the Red Army was poised to take over Warsaw, but they were thwarted. They had extended their supply lines too far. This is well described by Norman Davies in his doctorate, which he published as a book, White Eagle, Red Star, which I recommend. And we are advancing on Old Town Square. Here you have these scooters, which I think they should be banned, like in Paris. They're smart about it in Paris. Here they're relatively well organized, but people leave them strewn all over the sidewalks. You can trip over them. Blind people have problems with them. Old people have problems with them. People just throw them down on the ground like garbage because it's not their property and they don't care and there's no consequence for it. And of course they're darting around the streets like maniacs. Especially tourists, they do a joyriding thing where they fly around the sidewalks. Luckily, it's calmed down in the winter, or as the winter advances. We still have the fall, but it's getting colder. It's much more of a summertime problem, but that's enough of my ranting. So here we have the Old Town, Castle Square, the Royal Castle on the right, which was, like much of Warsaw, totally destroyed by the Germans. This was after the Warsaw Uprising. They leveled most of the city on orders from Himmler, and I believe Hitler was the one who gave it, and then Himmler passed it on. But it was rebuilt. I believe it was finally completed in the 1970s, so when my mom was growing up here in the 50s and 60s, it was still rubble, and then they, in stages, rebuilt it, collected money from the citizens. Here you have one of Poland's great kings on the column here, King Sigismund III. And if you're ever in Warsaw and you need to go to the bathroom, here you have a public bathroom that's very big and nice. So I recommend it. And again, the Old Town, the column, the Royal Castle, famous tourist spot. And then the walls of the Old Town are here. So this used to be, this is where Warsaw started. So this was the city. And everything else was the suburbs, anything beyond, where I was just walking from. Of course, it has greatly expanded, and this is no longer the center of the city. We're about 2 or 3 kilometers from the business center of the city. I believe the geographic center is just on the other side of the river, the Vistula River, which is over that way. And there in the distance, you can see the National Stadium on the other side of the Vistula River. St. Anne's Church, one of the places where Pope John Paul II visited. He made about 4 or 5 pilgrimages to Poland, most famously shortly after his selection as Pope in 1978. It's either 78 or 79. I always confuse it. Sorry, it was before I was born. Sorry. Like most history, but very famous. He was at Victory Square, which is now Józef Piłsudski Square. Of course, it wasn't called Piłsudski Square in communist times because Piłsudski was a nationalist, you could say, or patriotic hero of Poland, and the communists did not remind people of that. And 1 million people, roughly, came to see John Paul II, St. John Paul II, now. So the Old Town was totally destroyed, meticulously rebuilt after the war. Poles like to complain about a lot of things in general, but they say it's kind of a Disneyland, that it's not real because it was rebuilt, and I'm very glad it was rebuilt, and I think it's beautiful, and tourists come here and they love to see it. So of course it lost a lot of its character and artifacts and architecture and all that. You can't rebuild everything, but very glad that it's back. Now we're going to walk down Świętojańska Street, St. John's Street, I guess would be the translation, because this is where the cathedral, I believe it's the Archcathedral, technically, of St. John the Baptist is. The main shrine of Warsaw, where all the national services, funerals, various things mostly happen. Although there's also, now I forget the name of it, another big national shrine in Warsaw that was built not too long ago. there it is. Largely destroyed as well during the uprising and rebuilt like the rest of the old town. And I'm going to show you something really interesting that I always show people when I'm here with new people in the old town, showing them around. Part of the history from the Warsaw Uprising. So the walls were largely demolished. There was hand-to-hand close quarters fighting between the Germans and the insurgents of the Home Army, the Polish Home Army. And one of the things that was used to destroy the walls was a Goliath, which is a small tankette, small tank filled with explosives, controlled either by radio or by a cable, a remote cable. And here you have what's left of the tread of the German Goliath. So the translation is the tank tread of the German mini tank Goliath, which during the uprising, the Warsaw Uprising in 44, destroyed part of the walls of the cathedral. So if you're ever in Warsaw, come here to the side of the cathedral to take a look at that cool little bit of history. The insurgents were sometimes able to cut the cable or disable the radio connection and take the tank, retrieve the explosives, and then use the explosives against the Germans. So they did the same with artillery shells. There was heavy artillery fire against all parts of Warsaw at various times in the uprising, and they were able at times to get unexploded shells and pull the explosives out. Here you have a portrait of Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński, who was the primate of Poland. It's an honorific title. He's the head religious figure in Poland. I should know a better explanation, but he was very beloved and very important for Poland as far as maintaining the spiritual life, sustaining Polish national identity through the Catholic Church. During the communist occupation, he was imprisoned for several years as well. Here's the Jesuit church. And in a moment, we'll enter the Old Town Square, the center of the Old Town. From what I understand, it used to be filled with market stalls where people would buy and sell things. Many Jewish people lived in the Old Town before World War II and until the Germans came. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Polish people find that very important when something's on the UNESCO list. Here you have a picture of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, right there in the center, when he was here in the middle of Old Town Square. back in 1945, September 21st. And then here you can see a bird's eye view of the destruction of the city after the uprising. Just skeletons left of the buildings. And then here you have the rebuilding, the scaffolding and everything. And here we're about to enter it. Here we are. Ta-da! It's still a little early, but pretty soon we'll have people with like the Christmas market set up here with mulled wine, which is a hot wine, which I enjoy very much, and things to sell for Christmas, various regional baked goods and crafts. There will be an ice skating rink right here in the center. I'll definitely do another video once that's back up, so you get more of the Christmas vibe. We're still in the first half of November, so it's early. And then here we have the So a tour guide just told this guy to stop bothering them. I think he's selling some photos. Here you have the Mermaid of Warsaw, the Siren of Warsaw. And it seems like they redid this whole thing. Maybe not the statue itself, but it looks like this has been changed. I believe, yeah, this is a fountain that's usually working. Not now. So there we have the Siren. Let's get a nice closer look of her. So let me give you just a 360-degree view here. It's a bit cold, it's not ideal time of year, so it's not packed with tourists, but it's actually warm by Polish standards for this time of year. So you've got the little fires, little heaters going on the outdoor restaurants, a few of which I think are just here practically year-round. They might have a cover to stay warmer for tourists when it's colder, but... And then here on the corner we have a building that's near and dear to my heart. This is the Tadeusz Manteuffel Institute of History of the Polish Academy of Sciences. I know that's a mouthful. I've said it more than a few times, so I have it down. Manteuffel was a well-known Polish historian who helped reestablish the academia in Poland, in particular the history field after World War II. So that's why it's named after him. This is where he practiced his craft as a historian. And this is where I got my PhD and where I came many, many times, gave talks on my research. Here we have a historical event from 1937, and then here you see fragments of the old building that were kind of composed into what was rebuilt. Because, like I said, so much was destroyed, but attempts were made to... You have the angels on either side of the door. And then this is the door that I've entered in many times. You press the button there, and then you've got the cloakroom. And then here, just a sign of the pre-war times. This is the 100th anniversary of the History Association in Lvov, what is now Ukrainian Lviv. and the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the History Lovers Association in Warsaw. Then you have the dates, 1886 to 1986, Polish Historical Association. Lwów, like much of Poland or other towns, was part of Poland until it was brutally ripped away by the Soviet Union, Soviet Russia, at the end of World War II. Many people were expelled or escaped from there, knowing it would not be a place that was sympathetic to Poles. The population outside of Lwów, which is southeast of Warsaw, about a 4 or 5 hour drive, not counting a stay at the border. The majority population was Polish. The outside was Ukrainians, Polish, and then Jewish. And then, of course, there are a tiny minority now because the demographics changed dramatically between World War II and 80 years later. Here's one of the good coffee shops. There's actually two. I'm just going to go right here. So downstairs you have like a tea place, and then upstairs you have a coffee shop. So the old town is very popular with tourists because it's the most photogenic place in Warsaw. Because of the destruction of the war, Warsaw lost a lot of that European character, unfortunately. It was called the Paris of the East, I believe. I know that Bucharest, Romania, and probably other cities have also been called the Paris of the East or Southeast or whatever of Europe. But Poland definitely had more of that old school European vibe to it until the end of World War II. There was about 10% of the city was destroyed in 1939 when the Germans invaded, and then more like 80 or 90%, certainly of the strict center, right during and after the Warsaw Uprising. Even after the Warsaw Uprising, there was still much remaining, but the Germans systematically destroyed building by building. If you watch The Pianist by, now I forget the Polish director, the famous Polish director, but The Pianist is the story of Władysław Szpilman, the Jewish pianist. A lot of famous pianists in Polish history who survived World War II by hiding throughout Warsaw. At the end of that movie, there's a few scenes from the Warsaw Uprising, and then the systematic destruction of Warsaw by the Germans, flamethrowers, and destroying buildings with dynamite, like they did with the Royal Castle. They drilled holes in the foundation and put dynamite in there, and then blew it up. But you still have a decent amount of that throughout Warsaw, especially the old town, of the old character of the place. So we're slowly coming to the end of this walking tour. We're already going for almost 40 minutes. So let me know what you think. If you'd like to see more of Warsaw, I would be glad to show you more. This was especially a good opportunity for me to test the low light capabilities of this camera and to use it for the first time. Down there and to the right, we have the Supreme Court of Poland. We also have the Warsaw Insurgents Square, which I think I'll show you when it's daytime. That's where President Donald Trump gave his best speech of his presidency very good speech about Poland, about the uprising. I'll maybe do just a video on that and the things he referred to and show you those places in Warsaw that are actually quite near to where I live, very near. Here another church. Saint Hyacinth, I believe that's Jacek, but don't quote me on that either. Geez, these names are tough. I've attended Mass here a number of times. This another tragedy. I hate to tell you tragedy after tragedy, but this church was a field hospital. This is what it looked like before the war. It was a field hospital during the Warsaw Uprising that was bombed by the Germans, and I believe around 1,000 people perished in the church and in the basement. So it is kind of a tomb as well. Of course, as much as they could, they recovered bodies, but after the war, there are places where you just had to just start rebuilding, so there wasn't an opportunity to formally recover all the remains and bury everyone with honor, deserved of someone who dies, a funeral. So much of Warsaw is a kind of a graveyard in that sense. So it adds a somber element to being here, especially to being a historian, to having family roots in Warsaw, to knowing what was going on here. But we are happy to be alive. We do honor those who passed away by not forgetting about them and living the best life that we can, especially as a Pole. I feel strongly about this. My ancestors went through tough times. My predecessors, residents of Warsaw, Poles in general, and I feel I have a responsibility, especially as someone who is a native English speaker and can explain this often convoluted, complicated, difficult history with names that are difficult to pronounce. So we are going to end our tour here. Thank you for watching. Click on the subscribe button for more. And please let me know what you think of the quality of this video, if I should make any adjustments. Maybe I'm panning too much, but this is the first time I'm using this camera. So I'm going to pop into my one of my favorite coffee shops here, which I have a sentimental attachment to, which I will not go into. Czytadło, which is like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like readery, something like that. All right. Talk to you guys later. Nick Shakirski signing off from Warsaw.